looked absolutely horrible. A school resource officer was sent to the classroom, and Alex's parents were contacted. His dad arrived and insisted the police press charges for the incident. Frank tried to claim that Alex had been bullying him for at least the last year. He claimed Alex called him mean and racist names, and he said that Alex even took some video of Frank and posted it to Snapchat while making fun of him, calling him a nerd. He also said he saw Alex laughing at him earlier in the class, though other students didn't corroborate those claims, saying the two boys didn't interact all day. Some students that witnessed the punch stated that the assault came as a complete shock, and no one expected it. After Alex fell to the ground from the initial punch, Frank got on him and continued punching until the teacher intervened and stopped the fighting. Witnesses report that Alex did not fight back in any manner, and the teacher said that Frank had a look of pure rage on his face during the attack. Others report that Alex and Frank were actually friends before the one-sided fight. It's difficult to discern what the truth is. Yet, there appears to be no evidence that Frank was bullied, at least not by Alex. The teacher ordered Frank to stay after class. However, the moment the bell rang, Frank bolted. When he was later questioned, Frank alleged that he blacked out during the assault. He could only recall rushing at Alex, and then he went blank. As a result of the fight, Frank was suspended from school for 2 weeks. He was also criminally prosecuted and sentenced to probation and community service. It appears that this incident wasn't the only outburst of anger that Frank displayed. A wrestling teammate claims that Frank once got into a fist fight in the parking lot just after a meet. Allegedly, another wrestler teased Frank about his skills. Another time during 2017, Frank lost a wrestling match and instantly became infuriated, throwing his gear and screaming at his teammates, quote, "I'm gonna kill you guys." And he walked out of the gym. Frank's teammates were shocked. They didn't expect this outburst. It was the last time Frank attended a meet, or even a practice. Family members indicate that Frank was outgoing in school until he reached high school, which is a transitional time of change and growth for all teenagers. It seems that Frank was bullied, or he perceived that he was, and he was spending more and more time alone. In addition to the trouble from his fight at school, Frank had 2 other interactions with police, one for simple assault and one for criminal mischief. However, no charges were ever filed in connection with either incident.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
Frank's Facebook and social media showed posts about Islam and martial arts, though there doesn't appear to be any evidence of radical or extremist ideals, at least not according to the site intelligence group. He seemed to truly enjoy wrestling and watching informational documentaries. He was considered a sore loser, never taking losing well. Frank would get mad and toss his equipment around and swear at coaches. Frank's family life seemed happy. He seemed close with his siblings and parents, and there were several generations of family members living in the same 7-bedroom home. Frank lived in an upstairs bedroom of the gorgeous 2-story home that sat on a quiet cul-de-sac. The roof was covered with solar panels, and there was a pretty little stone path leading to the perfectly groomed backyard. As previously mentioned, the family owned several restaurants, 4 in fact, in the Denver area. They started with food trucks that eventually grew into full-blown restaurants. Frank worked at one of the restaurants called the Sultan Grill. A mere 2 months before the shooting, Frank's family had the opportunity to take over a new restaurant. It was a sweet deal, too. If they signed a 5-year contract, they would receive 1 year free of rent. Frank's family wanted him to run this new establishment, but he believed he was still too young for so much responsibility, and said as much, refusing the offer. A relative of Frank's indicated that he never took recreational drugs and didn't drink. Furthermore, he wasn't on any type of prescribed medications. The most anyone saw Frank do was smoke a hookah once in a great while, though that was a part of his culture, not him acting out in any type of way. However, at some point in 2014, Frank's paranoia began to increase, and he frequently told his brother that he was being chased and someone was following him. In fact, once he and his sister were having lunch together, Frank indicated that there was someone outside in the parking lot looking for him. She looked outside, but no one was there. Reports from after the shooting include Frank taping over the camera lens on his computer, posting to Facebook that the FBI was following him and even breaking the keyless remote fob to his car, believing his movements were being tracked through it. In July of 2019, his paranoid feelings were at an all-time high, and Frank would tell family that people were hacking his phone, and then would post about it on Facebook. One such post even says that a former high school classmate was the one hacking into his phone. While the family thought this behavior was a little odd, they didn't believe him to be dangerous or violent, certainly not capable of such an atrocious act of mass murder as the one he committed on March 22, 2021. No one in the family was scared of him, and he never presented as unsafe to the public, at least not in their eyes. Not that Frank's family was totally untouched by the criminal justice system. Some of his siblings had brushes with the law over the years and faced several evictions. Neighbors constantly felt disturbed by the family, filing noise complaints and lamenting about the constant car tires squealing in and out of the driveway. There were reports of toddlers randomly running around the yard, unsupervised and oftentimes running straight into the road, which presented its own unique danger, as there were constantly cars coming and going and parked at home, all hours of the day and night. It got so bad that 2 different neighbors moved away from the neighborhood cul-de-sac. A couple of Frank's brothers tried their hands at the used car business, though those ventures didn't seem to have panned out. In 2014, one of his brothers pled guilty to carrying a concealed weapon in Denver, and in 2016, one of his sisters was convicted of reckless endangerment and sentenced to a deferred sentence so long as she agreed to attend a parenting class. Another brother and his wife were divorcing in 2018 when an argument began over a torn mattress, escalating quickly enough for police to be called to the scene. Because police couldn't prove who damaged the items, no charges were ever filed or authorized, and the couple ultimately wound up reconciling. Despite spending a lot of time with family and the perception of closeness, Frank rarely interacted with his family during gatherings and get-togethers. No one was ever aware of him having a girlfriend. Indeed, he often posted on Facebook where he typically used the hashtag #NeedAGirlfriend. Though he also shared a ton of memes about video games too. Most of his posts seemed more childish than violent. No research produced proof that he was part of the incel community, or even especially religious or political. The worst part of Frank seemed to be his quick temper, which made many people avoid him. But it's certainly not an obvious trait for someone who would shoot up a store full of innocent people, trying to murder as many as possible. Frank spent one night in the hospital following the shooting. His leg was treated while outside his room armed police guarded the entryway, not permitting anyone except doctors and nurses inside or out. The following day he was released and booked into the Boulder County Jail. An investigation was conducted into the police shooting Frank in the leg. It was ultimately determined to be justified shooting. At approximately 3 a.m. the morning after the shooting, police surrounded his family home, using a loudspeaker to order each occupant outside. The entire block was awoken, and most likely every single front window of the cul-de-sac contained a curious neighbor, cautiously peering out, taking in the scene that must have looked like a movie come to life. Police and investigators spent about 90 minutes inside the house, searching for evidence and clues, anything to try and explain this atrocity. Afterwards, the home went dark, leading many to believe the family moved out under the cloak of darkness. After all, their name was all over the news, and this family was dragged into the mess, whether they intended it or not. The Sultan Grill, where Frank worked, was also temporarily closed. It has since been reopened, however, it's unclear whether the restaurant operates under the same ownership. Frank was arraigned the Thursday following the shooting, and he stood before the court, silent but for a single reply to the judge, who asked Frank if he understood that he was being held in jail without bond, to which Frank replied, yes.
We'll call case 21 CR 487, People of the State of Colorado versus. Can I have the appearance of counsel for the people, please?
Good morning, Your Honor. Michael Doherty and Ken Kuffner on behalf of the people of the state of Colorado.
Good morning. And for the defendant.
Good morning, Your Honor. Catherine Harold, Daniel King, and Sam Dunn on behalf of Mr. who is present.
Good morning, counsel. Good morning, Mr. Sir, you're here for an advisement hearing. I need to advise you of your rights pursuant to Rule 5. You need to understand that you need make no statements, and any statement that you do make can and may be used against you. You have the right to counsel. In this case, the Office of the Public Defender has been appointed to represent you. Any plea that you make must be voluntary and cannot be the result of undue influence or coercion. You have the right to bail if the offense is bailable. Right now, you're being held without bail. Mr. Doherty, do the people anticipate seeking a determination that the proof is evident and the presumption is great?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr. What that means is you'll be held without bail until such time as the court is able to determine whether or not the proof is evident and the presumption is great that you committed these crimes. You have the right to be informed of the nature of the charges. You have the right to a jury trial. And you have the right to demand and to receive a preliminary hearing within a reasonable time to determine whether probable cause exists. And if you're currently serving in the United States Armed Forces, or if you're a veteran of such forces, you may be entitled to receive mental health treatment, substance use disorder treatment, or other services as a veteran. Sir, do you understand those rights as I've explained them to you this morning? I need you to answer out loud, please. Yes. Okay, and for the record, you answered affirmatively. The people have filed a complaint and information charging 11 counts. Ms. Harold, on behalf of the defendant, will you acknowledge receipt of the complaint and information, waive formal reading, and further advisement?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. We need to set this matter for a hearing on proof evidence presumption grade along with the preliminary hearing. What's the defense's thoughts with respect to how soon we can set that hearing?
Your Honor, we would be requesting at this time that we actually set a status prior to setting the proof evidence presumption grade hearing. Our position is that we cannot do anything until we are able to fully assess Mr. mental illness. We cannot begin to assess the nature and depth of Mr. mental illness until we have the discovery from the government. It's my understanding that the government is continuing to investigate this case. The discovery is going to be voluminous. And so at this juncture, it doesn't make sense to set the proof evident presumption grade hearing. So we'd be requesting a status conference.
And so, is your client willing to waive his right to a preliminary hearing within 35 days to accommodate that or a later setting for preliminary hearing and proof evident presumption grade?
He is, Your Honor.
What's the people's position on the request for a status in advance of a preliminary hearing?
Thank you, Your Honor. The people have no objection. I leave it to the court's discretion. I will say the crime scene has not yet been completed in terms of the processing. We will be filing additional charges in the next couple weeks. The people have not received any discovery yet from law enforcement. The defense hasn't received any discovery, so the people have no objection to the defendant's request.
All right. How far out were you contemplating that status hearing?
Your Honor, it's hard to gauge, but I would ask 3 months.
Okay. And you've discussed this with your client, and he understands that he'll continue to be held without bond during that interceding 3 months or so.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. So I'm sorry, Mr. Doherty.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I do think 3 months is further out than I anticipated. I would ask for at most a month and a half. I think that'll give us time to have the crime scene processing completed, which I anticipate is the next couple days. Additional charges will be filed in the next 2 weeks, and then counsel will have the discovery available to them.
Well, so here's what I'm going to do. First of all, I'll grant the defendant's request to set this matter for a status hearing in advance of any setting for a preliminary hearing or a proof evidence presumption grade hearing. I'm going to direct counsel to contact the CJA for Division 13 to set that status conference. I'll authorize that status conference to be set in about 60 to 90 days. I understand the concerns that you have, Mr. Doherty, but at the same time, I want to make sure that the defense has ample opportunity to prepare to move forward once we do set that hearing.
He eventually had to be transferred to an undisclosed location. Safety concerns prevented Frank from being